Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. I've got another Master Duel video for you all today. So, today we're going to be talking about the Master Circuit Series Invitational, the end of the first season of the MCS, which I had a total blast playing in. Not just the Invitational, of course, but the series as a whole. I registered every single week, so I registered 16 out of 16 but due to some IRL stuff, I only ended up playing in 14 out of the 16 weeks. But all in all, still had a ton of fun playing during all those weeks. Managed to qualify for the Invitational, getting at least top 16, but top 8 in a couple of cases, a total of 3 different times. Myself with 3 different decks, Math Mech in week 2, Tier Limit in week 13, and then Sprite Punk in week 14. I took the Bestial Sprite Synchro deck that we saw yesterday to the tournaments, and I ended up going 4-3 myself was my finish before I ended up dropping out of the tournament because while many of the X2s qualified, unfortunately people with a record of X3 couldn't. But if I had managed to win out my last 2 rounds, then I really think I would have topped. So I got very, very close with a deck that MBT praised is pretty cool. And even though I ended up getting wrecked pretty hard by Tier Limit during my round 7 feature match, still seeing the reactions of people when I milled Deep Sea Sentry, or rather when my opponent milled Deep Sea Sentry off the top of my deck, was pretty good. It was pretty good to see the reactions in chat there. So yeah, all in all, I had a total blast. And now we're here to talk about the Invitational. So this was 140, I believe, was the total number of players who participated. It was between 140 and 150. And what you're seeing here before you right here is the actual breakdown of all the decks that were registered, that were entered into the deck. So keep in mind this is not only a field of people who have all at least gotten top 16 at some point in the last 16 weeks during the Master Circuit Series, but we had to kind of cook pretty hard with only a couple of days notice due to all of the major updates that came into Master Duel and the timing of it all. So looks like 45% of the crowd ended up bringing Tier Limit. This was actually very expected, to be totally honest. Was about this figure. It's kind of like I said during my last tier list video, where I was like, Tier Limit isn't going to be quite as dominant as it once was. But it will definitely still be the deck to beat, and it definitely was still the deck to beat today. Now, to be fair, this was, again, very young into this new format, and so it could be that maybe even less Tier Limits would have been here if we had had more time to test, but I think because the tournament was a few days out, a lot of people kind of fell back onto Tier Limits being the known best deck and the default best deck. But a lot of these other decks not only put up really good showings here in the tournament, but have been, I've noticed on ladder as well recently. The next of which being Sprite, which came in at 18% representation. I was one of those Sprite decks. The Sprite category completely encompassed Tri-Sprite, Pure Sprite with Bestials, and then Synchro Sprite, which I think, to my knowledge, I was the only one on Synchro Sprite, but of course there could have been somebody else, I just don't know. But I know there was at least one Tri-Brigade Sprite player. We're actually going to see their list here shortly, because if I recall correctly, they did get top 8 or 16, one of the two. But Sprite, yeah, with Sprint coming in, they may have only gotten 1 card. Well, actually, no, they got Double Cross as well, so they may have only gotten 2 cards, but those are 2 extremely powerful cards. The Bestial package ended up helping out Sprite greatly, even those that weren't on Synchros like myself, with Assault Synchron and stuff. Even still jamming a few copies of the Bestial monsters seemed to work out pretty well for the most part. Branded coming in next at 10%, again, not at all surprising. I actually was surprised there weren't more branded decks, not only in the field, but also in Top Cut, as we'll see here shortly. But Branded making a pretty huge splash with all of its new cards, including the Bestials. Dragon Link also making very good use of the Bestials, coming in at 5%. Flaunderies at 4%. Sword Soul I was a little surprised to see at 4%, but to be fair, I think I have underestimated just a little bit just how much the Bestials help them as well. And then we have the others of 14% total. So about what I expected going into the tournament, the field to look like. Sword Soul and honestly Dragon Link as well were a little bit higher than I expected. I did slightly underestimate how good Dragon Link would be post Bestials, but for the most part, other than that, in terms of like tier limit, Sprite, Branded. That was all pretty expected, those to be the top 3 decks to beat there. So now that we've taken a look at what all was entered into the Invitational, I'm going to go over here to the next tab, and this was the top cut pie chart here. As you can see, this is a screen grab from the actual stream that somebody posted to Reddit. But as far as top 16 goes, there was a representation of tier limit with 6 decks, Sprite with 5, Sword Soul with 2, and then Branded, Flauderies, and Exorcister each came in with 1 deck. So this was also about expected as far as tier limits representation in top cut. I didn't think they'd be quite as overwhelmingly represented in the top cut, just because it seems like with this update in particular, a lot of decks, just in the form of Bestials, but also in some other individual cards like Sprend, Branded's cards, and so on and so forth, those end up getting a huge power boost that pushes these decks all to be closer to the power level of where tier limit's at. Maybe not quite there. Tier limit is still, I think, the best deck, but it's not tier 0 anymore. It's just the top of tier 1, which I think this pie chart very well represents. Sprite coming in with 5 decks that end up getting top cut. One of those is, if I recall correctly, again, going to be a Tri-Brigade Sprite deck too. So yeah, that's pretty rad. That's actually very rad to see Sprite doing so well. I really like Sprite as a deck, but it makes sense too, right? Because we still will have Elf, and we have Sprint on top of that. And as a lot of people pointed out, this is not just true of Sprite either, but of a few different decks. We've not quite had this combination of cards like available in a previous format before. So we're seeing Sprite at a power level where it's actually able, I think, to keep up with tier limit pretty reasonably well. And will honestly probably join it as a tier 1 deck moving forward. Sword Soul coming in with 2 is a little bit surprising to me that we saw not just 1 but 2 Sword Souls, especially when you consider that Branded only had 1 deck in. That I think is the most surprising part of this top cut to me. I expected Branded to have, well, definitely more than 1 deck, especially given that they were 10% of the field there. I expected at least 2, if not 3, maybe even 4. I honestly thought Branded and Sprite were kind of going to be the other way around. I think I underestimated Sprite a little bit and maybe ended up overestimating Branded. To be fair, with literally all of these decks except for Flow and Nexo jamming Bestials, and to be fair, Flow and Nexo just jam their own kind of anti-graveyard stuff, we could be seeing a situation where perhaps there is too much like light dark graveyard hate for Branded Despia. Now, to be fair, they don't always like need their stuff to be in the graveyard. A lot of the times they can just have it banished, and that's fine. But one of the main choke points that I've noticed when playing against Branded Despia, not just in the tournament but in general, is that when they are going for the Albion fusion, you can often use a Bestial to banish the Albaz out of the graveyard, and because Albion has to banish stuff from the hand, field, or graveyard to fuse, that means they're not able to go into Lubellion, Mirror Jade, any fusion that involves Albaz, which, you know, is obviously going to be a lot of them, or at least a lot of the important ones there. So it could be that perhaps Branded Despia is just in a spot where it's just too much like specific hate in that regard, but that is also a very niche kind of point, and I think it could just be a lack of experience as well. This is a version of Branded Despia that's definitely not been seen in Master Duel. It's very different from the iterations played up to this point. So to be fair, the only players who would have a lot of experience with this iteration of Branded Despia are players who have TCG, OCG experience. This could be a case where if we'd had another week for the MCS, perhaps we would have seen a lot more Branded Despia decks top, just because people would have been more familiar with the deck as a whole. And then, yeah, Flauderies and X-Sister each sneaking in also makes sense. Of course, they are not only good against tier limits in this meta, but just good in general against Branded Despia. They can be good against Sword Soul. They have some decent options, keeping their stuff out of the graveyard so Sword Soul can't proto, so use Taya. Sprites, Sprite doesn't need the graveyard. Sprite does sometimes run Dimension Shifter, but also, Elf and Sprend definitely need stuff to be and exist in general in the graveyard. So these graveyard hate decks against Seeking End just does make a lot of sense. So now that we have seen the breakdown of the top 16 decks, let's go ahead and go to this next tab over here, and we're going to look at the actual lists themselves. Let's take a look at these top 16 lists here. I'm actually going to start from the bottom, so that way we see the first place list last. So Looks like the branded SP list did not clear top 16. They were on 41 cards there. I remember seeing them play a couple of times in some of the feature matches. They were, in fact, on the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare lock using branded Expulsion. You might be wondering, well, wait, in the past, wasn't branded Expulsion with Ido like proven too inconsistent? And that was true in the past, but with current branded Espia, your combo line actually allows you to go for branded Expulsion without going too far out of your way to do so. Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is also a better target than Ido because it locks your opponent into Gimmick Puppet summons. It doesn't require itself to be on the field, or worse, summon itself to your field, like Ido does. And the lingering effect is also for the entire turn, so even if your opponent manages to get the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare off of the field, they still are not able to special summon monsters for the rest of the turn except for Gimmick Puppet monsters. So makes sense why we're seeing that here. This is definitely, pretty true and through new branded Despia with the fusion deployments at 3. We're going to be covering this deck very soon, probably tomorrow, if not the day after, here on the channel as well. We'll be taking a look at a list a lot like this. So yeah, there is a new branded Despia making top 16. Here is one of the 6 tier limit lists here, piloted by Sveti. Sveti notably is not only using Diviner of the Herald, but also a single copy of Assault Synchron. Assault Synchron, I've said it so many times on this channel, and I'll keep saying it. This card is cracked. This card is insane. This card is so good, especially in conjunction with Chaos Ruler, who we can see here in Sveti's list as well. Makes a lot of sense, right, why you'd want to include those, because the Excavate can, of course, not only grab any number of, well, a lot of the cards from your deck, not any number of them, but on top of that, if we end up sending a Fuser and putting it in the graveyard, we can potentially get another Fusion summon that way, and especially with something like Assault Synchron, the Fusion summon ends up being pretty, or the Synchro summon for Chaos Ruler, rather, ends up being pretty free, especially with one of the Bestial cards here. I'll show the side deck here for each of these as well. I'll try to remember to do that. Looks like they're also playing Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal, in their deck, which is used when overlaying 2 of the Bestial monsters, and can then send any card from your deck to the graveyard, which is obviously going to be very good for tier limit. Alright, next up we have our single Exosister list. It's pretty much just standard Exosister stuff. I don't know. I've never played the deck myself, and to be totally honest, I'm not a huge fan of it. But that said, I definitely still respect it as a deck, and also very much respect Rio for topping with it here. I don't want to seem like I'm throwing any shade on the player just because I'm not a huge fan of how the deck plays here. But again, makes sense why we're seeing Exosister making the top cut. It's a pretty good meta call, and it's a pretty good deck overall. This list, again, I don't personally am not too experienced with Exosister playing it, but from what I can tell in my times playing against it, I don't think we're seeing anything too out of the ordinary as far as attacks go here or anything. So yeah, there's the top 16 list there. Here's one of our 2 Sword Soul lists. As you can see, we are making good use of the Bestials, rocking a copy of each of the level 6 ones. We're also playing Destrudo as well, which is a very interesting tech choice that I've seen sometimes in Sword Soul, but I don't know too much about Sword Soul to make a call on that, on how good that is. I can see how it is better with the Bestials, potentially, but it seems like for the most part, our target is Yazi. Although to be fair, for Fuso, the Bestial becomes level 1, right? I imagine a lot of the time we want this card to be level... Actually, I don't know what level we want it to be. Yeah, to be totally honest, I gotta be, completely frank. I'm not super certain about the use of Destrudo beyond just making Yazi. I guess with the Adhara, or I guess an effect failure, which you're playing 3 of, we could also make it level 6 and then use that to make Wallow, founder of the Dirge Dragons, but that's mostly going to be made, I imagine, by using 2 of the Bestial cards there. Note also that we're using Mapura over Shithana as our level 4 Temi of choice. Also that this deck is on 50 cards, which is pretty wild. But if it works, it works. Multiple Protos as well makes a lot of sense. So yeah, pretty all-around sensible Sword Soul list here, piloted by One Sock. Next up we have Jefferson, who looks like they were on Sprite tier limit. Wow, I wonder if this counted as one of the Sprite decks or one of the tier decks, but yeah, it's definitely, we've got the blues, the jet, the red, and everything, in conjunction with our Diviner of the Herald. I imagine is how we typically summon that. And we have another Chaos Ruler package here as well. So Chaos Ruler might be more commonplace moving forward than expected. We even side decked the Baron, which is interesting. But yeah, Chaos Ruler in tiers might be a lot more commonplace than I expected moving forward. We'll definitely have to see there. Alright, next we have, scrolled up a little too far there, H Sato X was piloting tier limits here. Fairly standard for the most part. It looks like we are onto Ghost Bell and Droplet, which is, both of those are pretty irregular text, but the Ghost Bell actually does make quite a bit of sense because the Bestials, I believe, are those part of the effects to banish them? Yes, it is part of the effect to banish the Bestial, the Light or Dark monster for the Bestial summon. It only targets as a condition, so makes a lot of sense why we're taking Ghost Spells. That's very good against, you know, not only the Bestials, but a lot of other graveyard-based cards in the format as well. Extra deck is fairly standard. Side deck's got some pretty deep Shadal packages going on. Note that we did not main any of the Super Polys here. In this particular instance, we side decked all three of them, which is pretty interesting. Looks like we opted for Droplet over Super Polys here. Okay, Cthulhu's got another tier limit list here for us. This one is I think this one is very standard. This is a very by-the-books tier limit list. The Diviner, it's interesting that we're seeing a lot more Diviners, mostly I imagine because of the Bestials, but here we're not playing Chaos Ruler in the extra, which is interesting, that we chose to go Diviner without access to Chaos Ruler, but still obviously worked out very, very well, and I think it's still a fine package, but yeah, pretty standard stuff there. Here is our Flandreese player, Alex O, which I thought I was playing in SEMO, honestly, when I played against this person. And, I mean, you can see why Alex and O's, and, you know, they've also won a couple of tournaments, which is, I think, all those factors is why I made that assumption. But I actually lost round one to this player here, Alex, who has again, I think, fairly by-the-books Flandreese list. The 2 Book of Eclipse is interesting over Book of Moons. That's a bit more of a tech call, I think. But for the most part, like, yeah, I mean, a very solid Flandreese list here. All right, here we have, check this out, on Sprite. So this is going to be, wow, that's interesting. That's our first Sprite list, unless the Sprite tier list counted as Sprite. But I think that means that all the Sprite decks got top 8 or better, which is definitely says something for Sprite if that doesn't actually end up being the case. But we're on the engine here of Nimbles, including now 2 copies of Nimble Angler, going to be very standard moving forward. Being able to dump the Angler with the Sprint in order to immediately set up 2 level 4s on the board is extremely good. The Melfi package is here as well, with the Caddy and the Penny, as well as the Melfi of the Forest. And we also have Merry Melfis in this particular extra deck. Merry Melfi is not necessary, but sometimes run alongside Herald of the Arclight for another level 4 Seeker option. And as you can see, we have a lot of Bestial cards here as well. Another, again, as I noted earlier, recurring trend in a lot of these Sprite lists here. So there's that. Here's our other Sword Soul list. Delta on Sword Soul, jamming the Bestials, again, as you can see here. This one did not play Destrudo, but otherwise, you know, aside from Bestials, is a lot of the same Sword Soul Tindy stuff that we've been seeing. Notably in the extract, they are on Wallow and Zeus, which is pretty interesting that we actually have the ability to go into a Zeus line now in Sword Soul. So yeah, I'm going to have to try some of these new texts that we're seeing out here in Sword Soul myself, for sure. Okay, here is another one of our Sprite lists, and I saw the 3 Lubellians here, and I was like, no way, is this Sprite Synchro? But no Assault Synchrons here. But wow, this could very easily slot those in. Of course, you have to change the extra deck around quite a bit, but yeah, I mean, we're seeing not only Bestials, but even the 3 Lubellians to search them all. The Nimble package again, Frogs again, Melfis again. Again, all this stuff going to be very standard moving forward, I think, for Sprites there. All right, here we have Workalos. Workalos is a pretty good friend of mine who I watch quite often on Twitch, and I highly recommend you do as well. She is on Twitch, twitch.tv/Workalos, as you can see spelled here. She is definitely just probably the best tier limit player I know personally, and I wouldn't be surprised if she wasn't just the best tier limit in a Master Duel player right now. I think she is anyway, but yeah, Workalos's list is pretty by the books, which is something I respect about her builds a lot. I mean, I am also a very by the books player when it comes to builds. I usually don't use too many wild techs, but everything we're seeing here is just optimal not branded, geez, tier limit stuff, optimal tier limit stuff, which is what we would expect. We're seeing the Bestials, we're seeing the Super Polys, extra deck's looking pretty good. Beatrice in this extra deck as well. Side deck's looking very solid as well. So yeah, definitely makes sense why Rourke got top 8. I think she played in 12 weeks and tops during 5 of them and won 1. And got second during another, if I recall correctly. That should all be correct. So yeah, Rourke, not surprised at all to see her up here. And again, highly recommend her Twitch channel there. All right, next up we have Menethol, got top 4 with Tri-Sprite. This is cool. I'm very eager to try this deck out myself now that we have Sprind. That was definitely the missing piece. Tri-Sprite was honestly kind of mid before Sprind came out. You had to play some pretty mid cards in the extra deck, and your lines in general were just not the best. But now that Sprind is out, the deck is at full power. Sprind having the ability to send Kit from the deck to the graveyard is exceptionally good, and as you can see, did very, very well in the tournament. I honestly, seeing Menethol do so well with Tri-Sprite kind of makes me wish that I'd maybe taken Tri-Sprite as well. But either way, I definitely cannot wait to dive into some more Tri-Brigade action here soon on the channel. All right, looks like we have yet another Sprite deck in top 4. Wow, Sprite is looking very well poised going into this new meta here. This is another very by the books list piloted by Shinobi, but of course, just because it's by the books doesn't mean that it's not a great list there. Again, I tend to think those tend to be the best builds, the ones that are not using quite as much wild tech unless you've really cooked and experimented with it and know it's great against the meta. But yeah, I mean, everything down from the main to the extra and the side deck here looks very solid, makes a lot of sense. Again, we're seeing Bestials and Melfies moving forward. I think those are going to be extremely consistent along with the Nimble package for Sprites here. Alright, Sprites piloted by Alex ended up taking second place. This was the only build we've seen playing Dimension Shifter that is, the only Sprite build that's playing Dimension Shifter that we've seen so far. But perhaps that's what took Alex all the way to second place there through the top cut. I actually didn't stay to watch the top cut matches myself. I was pretty burned out of Yu-Gi-Oh! By that point in the day. So, but yeah, Dimension Shifter we're seeing here, in addition to, of course, Bestials and Melfies and the Nimble package. Again, all very expected. Looks like we even side decked into a Scythe Lock as well with the Artifact Sanctums, which is pretty neat. And then in first place we have Hey. I think Hi. I actually don't know how it's pronounced, but they took first place with Tier Limits. Again, a very by-the-book list, and again, makes sense why a list like this did so well. We're seeing the Ash Blossoms are definitely proving to be just standard, I think, in Tier Limits moving forward, which, again, to offer a point of praise to Worklows, she was on Ash Blossoms far before everybody else was, when everyone else was still on like 3 DD Crow and 0 Ash Blossoms. Again, we're seeing Bestials, we're seeing the 3 Super Polys, we're seeing the Saronniers in the side deck as well, just all the kind of stuff you would expect to see. So yeah, there it is. That is the wrap-up for the MCS Invitational, and in turn is going to be the wrap-up for the first season of the MCS. I am super looking forward to the next season of the MCS. I know MBT has been talking a lot about how this tournament series bankrupted him, so the cash prize support might not be as good, but honestly, it's like I said in the tournament Discord chat yesterday. Like, somebody said as a joke, like, oh, watch the next MCS have a top first place prize of like 5 cents. And I responded, you know what? I would still show up every single week. And I mean that because I think playing in these tournaments has been a lot of fun, and the prize support that came from topping was all completely incidental as far as I'm concerned. Even here in the 10K, I went into it not even thinking about the $10,000, but more just thinking about, like, I can't wait to play this new deck in this new format with a lot of the new friends that I've also made here in the tournament series as well. So yeah, it was a blast. I'm hugely looking forward to the next one, and you can expect to see me participating in that series consistently, as well as other tournaments here moving forward. But that is going to do it for our breakdown of the first Master Circuit Series Invitational. Now let's go ahead and move on to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now. So without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.